What I love about writing is there's nobody around. There's nobody in the house. Even the cat is kind of banished to the garden or is, asleep somewhere. That's what I really like about it. It's just me. I've always wanted to make sure, in the crime fiction especially, that what was happening was as close to reality as I could make it. It's rooted in the everyday. But if you think about the way crime fiction works, something happens, usually it's a dead body, and then the detective has to pick his or her way through to the end. Well, that's what you do as a writer. So you're mimicking as a writer what the detective is doing. And sometimes it will be like a pinball machine. So all the different parts of the story are like bits of the pinball. But then you send the ball around and you start from whichever one it hits. And then it might go off in any direction. And so some of my books will begin like that. I'll choose a starting point without knowing where I'm going to go. But because I've got all of the stuff there, I know there are places that I can go. It's a puzzle, and sometimes it isn't organised and sometimes it is. There's got to be a way through. But you shouldn't write a crime novel which is as totally formulaic, say, as a Western. Yes, there is a formula, but you have to be much more your own person. But then I'd been watching Hill Street Blues, which I loved, and I was able to get a television series off the ground in the States, in England, called Hard Cases, which was set in Nottingham, and it was about the probation service, but about the probation service workers and about the criminals that they dealt with and so on. And it was filmed on the streets in Nottingham. It had a multi-strand, narrative line, just like Hill Street Blues. But that got me into thinking I wanted to write about Nottingham in a kind of urban setting, and B, thinking I wanted a multi-strand storyline with one character at the center. So in my mind, Resnick, when I started writing about him, was going to be like Frank Furillo. He was going to be like the middle management guy, who held off the bosses and got his team working as well as he could. And of course, borrowing from Hill Street Blues, I was borrowing from your friend Ed McBain, which is where a lot of the Hill Street Blues stuff came from. And that was where Resnick began in my mind. This guy, this Frank Furillo-like guy in the center of all these activities. Patrick Jansen Smith, of Transworld fame, who is still in the business, bless him, rang me at home and said, "John, we're looking for someone to write Western series. Are you interested?" I mean, I'd been doing freelance writing for about 2 years. He could have rung and said, "We're looking for someone to write women's knitting patterns." And I would have said, "Yes, just what I've been thinking about, Patrick." So that's the first part of the answer. And the second part of the answer is that my father was a big Western movie fan. And he took me to every Western movie that played in the whole of North London, all the time I was growing up. So I knew Western movies. So when Patrick said, "Do you want to write a Western series?" I just started rechanneling all those ideas from Western movies in Western fiction. The very short answer is there weren't enough fans. It's true. It's true. The books had always sold comfortably in the UK and here, but sales had not increased with the degree to which publishers or publishers' accountants are happy. You will know this story as well as I. So that was part of the reason. I felt that in sales terms, I had to watch out, I think that was roughly the year in Britain that HarperCollins or someone got rid of their whole mid-list in a single swoop. I was looking over my shoulder. I thought, oh hell, something bad might happen now. Also, I'd not been living in Nottingham for a few years, so I didn't have that sense of knowing where I was writing about in the same way. And I felt I was getting lazy. Writers, this, should not get lazy. You do 10 books, you write a book a year about somebody, and, you do get lazy. It's difficult to avoid it. I mean, it's Monday morning. You come downstairs, you have your cup of coffee, you sit down at the typewriter or word processor. You're not quite certain what to do. You've got to do, 1,000 words. You think, okay, I'll get Resnick to get up. he'll have a shower, he'll come downstairs, he'll feed the cats, he'll make his coffee, he'll make himself a sandwich, and that's my 1,000 words for the day. Thank you very much and good night. You can do that. And the problem is that on one level, that's what loyal readers want. They want to read about Resnick doing the same stuff, right? You want to read about the cats and you want to read about the sandwiches. And I can understand that, but for a writer to kind of have to keep doing that is not a good thing. So I think it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. So I thought from my writing point of view, I needed to move on. And I thought from my career point of view, I probably needed to move on. And I thought I needed to write what publishers wanted them, which they wanted a longer book. You know, publishers will always say, we want a big book. So I thought I've got to add another 20,000 words on, and I thought I had to write something that was more of a thriller, by which I understand someone in jeopardy. More plot than in the Resnick books, people in jeopardy, more excitement, more narrative, more story, another 20,000 words, different kind of book. So I thought about that during the time I wasn't writing. And then, I don't know, my tame psychologist would say, okay, you've just had a new daughter, and what do? You write about this man who has problems with his teenage daughter. I mean, go figure. And so while I was thinking in this 18 months, what was I going to do? I thought, okay, that's what I'll do. I'll write about this man, I'll develop the relationship with his daughter, I'll push them as far apart as I can, and then see if I can some way bring them together again. And you're right in my mind what you say. I mean, those books are about his relationship with his daughter, and that's the arc of the books. And that's why I don't want to write, although my editor out there won't thank me for saying this, I don't really want to write another Elder book, I don't think, because I think that story's finished. I think that story's through. But the other reason for writing the new Resnick book is I wanted to write about grief. Several friends of mine, good friends, round about my age, had died. And I wanted to use that. That sounds kind of, I don't know if that sounds quite a nice thing to do, but I wanted to use it, but I wanted to see if I could really write as well as I could about that experience of grief. And I thought Resnick was the character I knew best that I could do that through. And it was a thing about, could I write about grief convincingly within a crime novel? And so, I'm still writing a crime story, it's got to move along, it's got to have narrative pace, but yet convey those feelings. And that was my kind of challenge to myself, if you like, was to do that. Well, it's vicarious pleasure. What can I say? I mean, that's one of the things about writing. If you can't do it, let your characters do it for you. That's what I've always felt. Yeah.
So it's all fiction then.
Oh yeah. What you have to do is a limited amount of research, but in my case, that's just memory rather than anything else. It's interesting though about Charlie, because although he does have a degree of kind of success, if you like, it never ends too well. It wouldn't do for him to be lonely all the time, would it? In my terms, I think I write slowly, and so the draft that would be my first draft would be quite a careful one. And I do think a lot about word use. I think some writers get it down and then go over it and revise it, whereas I tend to, try and go more or less sentence by sentence. Yeah. I do think I have a problem with endings, and some of my books I like more because the ending I think is kind of okay. I think in a lot of my books they kind of tail down at the end more than they should. I mean, a book like Cold Light in the Resnick series, where Lynn Kellogg is kidnapped and she needs to be rescued in the end, and the story actually goes to the last line. And that was the book where I wrote the last sentence of the book before I started. So in a way, because I knew the last sentence, maybe that ends particularly well. Easy Meat, I love the ending of, because I think it's really kind of strong and surprising. But I do think in some of my books, especially maybe the Resnick books, they do kind of tail out a little at the end. And I do think it's a real problem, and I can't honestly say that I think I've always successfully solved it by any means. with the Resnick books, I used to be usually a bit more cavalier about it, and I used to kind of know the start, and I used to use a whiteboard and kind of do things in a circle with different colors, you know, because I used to be a school teacher, and school teachers love different colors. So I had all these different colored bits all over the board in a circle, and then the main incident was in the middle, and I would kind of choose which way to go, and the different colored bits of the plot would line up. So I'd have a vague idea of the end, but I wouldn't know how I was going to get there. I think what I do is to set up 2 or 3 people who might have done whatever the dastardly deed was, and give them all some kind of motivation and opportunity, and then choose. And then about 4/5 of the way through the book, make a definite choice. The best crime novel I've read in the last 2 or 3 years is The Broken Shore by the Australian writer Peter Temple, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And, you know, I wish I'd written that book. I read Peter Temple, obviously. In fact, I've reread The Broken Shore 3 times in the last 18 months or whenever since it was published. George Pelecanos, I read as soon as it comes out. I read crime writers who don't call themselves crime writers, or at least their publishers don't. So Richard Price's Lush Life, I think, is one of the best crime books, although it's not sold as such, that I've read in the last year or so. I guess those kind of urban writers who deal with, you know, who cover sort of the same ground that I do, right, but in American terms, are the people I like George. And Laura Lippman's 2 standalone books, I think, are wonderful. Yeah, that's the general ballpark area, really.
Okay.